All right. Well, here we go, everybody. Ready? We're going for it. It's the
Mhm.
7:14. It's Friday. It's a good morning already. How y'all doing this morning? Tim, how
Yeah,
you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad it's Friday, and we did it. We made it through fake spring. Here it comes finally. Here we go. I'm warming up. We're getting to March is here. I mean,
Woohoo.
I know last week was March, but it's starting to feel like March. We got the extra daylight now. It's awesome. I'm feeling good.
It's the real deal, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
this is it's gonna stick. I just know it,
hmm
right?
hmm
Oh man. Well, yeah, everybody, how are you doing this morning? Are you loving this weather? I know it's going to dip down a little bit next week, but that's all right. It's on the uptick here, so we know
Yeah.
warm weather's coming, right? So we'd love to hear in the chats how you're doing today. Just hope you're doing well. Hope it was a good week for you as you're finishing it up and going into the weekend. And Colton and I were talking, last week actually we were talking about this. Um, and thinking, man, here it is. We're in March, right? It's the middle of March, and Easter's coming next month in April, which it's a little later this year, which is kind of cool. So we were actually talking about kind of going through a little bit of the Exodus story, kind of leading up to that. We're still doing this, these famous Bible stories, right? And with Moses, there's just a ton of stuff there that people think of in the Bible, even if they're not real familiar with the Bible. They might think of the stories in Exodus with Moses and the Israelites and Egypt and all of that. But obviously, this big picture that it's all pointing to is what Jesus accomplished, right? And so we kind of thought it'd be kind of cool to look at what God was doing through Moses in the story of Exodus, and then leading up to the Passover, and maybe getting into the Passover Lamb, Jesus Himself, through that. So, hope you all will join us in this kind of little adventure. We know the guys did Exodus chapter 3 here about a week or so ago, the burning bush. So we're going to jump into Exodus chapter 4 today. If you're following along with us, please do that. Get in whether you're on the Bible app, the YouVersion Bible app, or you've got your physical Bible open, ready to highlight, maybe draw. I don't know. Does anybody out there still do that with highlighting? I do. I mark it up all over the place.
Yeah,
So
the doodles or something, add the fun stuff. My wife likes to do that, add the little doodles on the side as well
does she? That's
to make
great.
the notes look good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, mine don't look pretty at all. It looks like I was like, what is going on? If you were to look at my Bible, it's like, what is happening right now? But yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, mine's all like post-it notes, just like a rough. You're like, what? But yeah.
that's great. That's great. All right. Well, I say we jump into it. We're just going to start reading through Exodus chapter 4. I can kind of start reading. I'm reading out of the CSB this morning, so don't know what version you guys have out there, but so here it is. Again, coming off the heels of chapter 3, where Moses encountered the Lord in the burning bush. And it says this in chapter 4, verse 1. It says, Moses answered, because the Lord is calling him to go to Egypt, to go to Pharaoh, and be like, listen, you got to let my people go, right? And he's going to tell the people this, tell the Hebrews this. So Moses answered the Lord, what if they won't believe me and will not obey me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you? The Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. Throw it on the ground, he said. So Moses threw it on the ground. It became a snake, and he ran from it. The Lord told Moses, stretch out your hand and grab it by the tail. So he stretched out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. This will take place, he continued, so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. In addition, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. So he put his hand inside his cloak. And when he took it out, His hand was diseased, resembling snow. Put your hand back inside your cloak, he said. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it had again become like the rest of his skin. If they will not believe you and will not respond to the evidence of the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the second sign. And if they don't believe even these two signs or listen to what you say, take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. All right, so let's just stop right there, kind of talk through, because man, this is so good, right? So good right here. And again, just kind of reiterating or reminding ourselves of what's taking place. Moses was obviously, I think most of us know the story, but just real briefly, Moses was born as a Hebrew, right? These were slaves in Egypt, and the Pharaoh wanted to kill all the firstborn sons of the Hebrews, and so they hid Moses. His parents hid him. They made a little ark, a little basket, and put him down the Nile River, and he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. Right, so she finds him, just falls in love with him, and so Moses, and we see this in the book of Hebrews, which gives us even more information. I think that's so cool that Moses, he was raised in the house of Pharaoh. He was eloquent of speech. He was trained up in the ways of Egypt. He knew stuff, right? He
Mhm.
remember Egypt was at this time, uh, if not one of, it was the greatest empire in the known world. It was an immense powerhouse. And this is what Moses was raised up in, right? So he knew things. He was very world weary. Maybe he was knowledgeable in the things of the world again. Um, and then it says one day he went out and he looked upon the Hebrews, the slaves, knowing he was a Hebrew, right? He saw how they were mistreated, and it says he actually killed an Egyptian guard, right? And he was a murderer at that point. Tried to cover it up, and he was scared. He ran off, and he spends all these years in the wilderness, running away from what he felt called to do. Felt like God was calling him to rescue his people, but he was trying to do it his own way by killing the Egyptian instead of what God was going to do. So, for like 40 years, he goes off in the wilderness. He's shepherding, living a good life, right? And then God appears to him and says, "What are you doing? I want to use you to set my people free." And that's where we get the story of the burning bush and all of that. So here Moses, just kind of setting up where we're at right now, he's still kind of on the fence. He's still not sure because he's insecure in himself. He's felt like he messed things up. There was, I think, probably a lot of confusion just in the way he was raised, knowing he's a Hebrew, but he's in the household of Pharaoh and all of this stuff going on in his mind. And then he's asking the Lord, like, how will they believe me? And God is so patient, and I think that's what will kind of springboard our conversation here, just to start with. He's so patient with us, and he tells Moses, "I'm going to give you some signs that you can show them." Like pretty miraculous stuff here, right? That we can kind of talk more about, but that's just kind of what I wanted to give us, just kind of a really brief overview of where Moses is, and again how good God is to us. Because I don't know about you, Colton, I feel like I do this a lot, where God's telling me to do something, calling me, just in the basic calling of a follower of Jesus, right, to tell people the gospel, and I'm like, really, me? I mean,
Mhm.
God, I don't, and he's so patient with us. But I don't know. Do you feel that way ever, or you're like, no, I know where I am, and
Yeah, no, I definitely am somebody who's just like, oh, I feel like I'm being miscalled, and I feel like Moses. Well, I guess I like reading this just because it's like he asked the question, right? And we're talking about patience, but it's just like, man, I feel like maybe I'm not being called to do something I don't know. And then Moses, like, he just asked the question, like, hey God, what if they do not believe me or listen to me? Like, I feel like that's a rational response. Like that's a humanly rational response to anything. Like, what if they don't listen to me and say that the Lord didn't appear to me? Um, and then you see that the Lord is like is patient. with him. And he's like, "What is in your hand?" Which always just it's kind of just funny to see God, and then when we're in the New Testament where you see Jesus, where Jesus is like it's all the same, like same God across the board, just like I'm not actually going to answer your question directly. I'm going to show you something. Like I'm going to show you what I mean by this, or by what I'm telling you. And so then we get these two signs here that God decides, hey, I'm going to actually show you what I mean by like listen to me, what I have planned for you. So.
Hmm. I love that you said that too about that's a pretty normal response, or you would think that that response from Moses, because yeah, he's recognized that he murdered this guy. He ran off. You know, the Hebrews at that time even were like, you know, who are you? You know, and I think for him thinking, I messed up. I
Mhm,
messed up, and then I ran away. It's been so long, like 40 years. Like there's no way that they're gonna listen to me, right? And I think we can really sabotage ourselves a lot
mhm,
as followers of Jesus, knowing who he is. We have confidence in him and what he accomplished on the cross, resurrecting from the grave, and all of this stuff. But we really do put it more on ourselves. We're like, oh, well, they won't believe me or listen to me because I've done this and I've done that. We really made it about us
mhm.
instead of about him. And that's what I think God is trying to get Moses to say or to see here. He's like,
Yeah.
Moses, are you trusting me? Because it sounds like you're trusting in yourself right now.
Mhm,
And I mean, I'm guilty of doing that, you know, from time to time as a human being. I'm like, man, I feel like I do that. Instead of like, no, if God is telling me to do something, and by the way, if we're following Jesus, he has told us to share the gospel, to share the good news of Jesus. Like that is a command for every Christian. And if he's telling us to do something, he's going to equip us.
mhm.
Just like here with Moses, you know, he's going to equip. He equipped Moses. He's like, look, I'm going to give you some signs you can show them. Like, you
Yeah.
can't do this on your own, Moses. And we're going to see some of these signs as we go on into the story over the next, few weeks for us as we're, talking about this. And then one of them is that staff, the serpent, right?
Mhm,
So we'll kind of keep that in mind. But I just love how, again, patient and faithful God is with us because he knows our frailty as human beings, mentally and emotionally and spiritually, And he's like, look, I'm telling you, you have to trust me in this. I'm calling you, I'll equip you. I'm the one. And he really led off with that, with the whole burning bush thing, because he told Moses, I am. Tell them I am has sent me. I am who I am. When we put it on ourselves and we say, well, this is, I've got to come up with this plan. I've got to do this. We're saying I am, and we are not. It's God working in us and through us. It's him, the great I am, who actually makes things happen, right? When we share the gospel, it's not our gospel, it's his. We just get to tell it. And that's what Moses is doing. He just gets to tell. He's going to tell Pharaoh, look, God, the Lord, Yahweh, the great I am, is telling you, let my people go. Right? They're not my people. They're his people. So
mhm.
he mentions the Nile, which again, that's kind of a little prelude there. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, working through some of like these signs, I just think it's like Moses is like, well, can I believe it? And then God's just like, well, don't you know I have you? Don't you know I got you? Like, and then he makes him work for it, which I think is awesome because he's like, so like the first signs, like throw that staff on the ground, throws it
Mhm.
on the ground, it becomes a snake, and then Moses runs away, some sort of threatening snake. He's like, I don't want to touch that. So at some point he's scared of it, and then he's like, God's like, well, now reach out and grab it. And they'll only grab it by like you would think. And I don't know if anyone watches like snake wranglers. Like the best places to grab a snake is like behind the head, like because
Oh,
then it can't like whip around and bite you. Like the worst place I think to grab a snake would be the tail because it has the ability to just turn around and grab you, like bite
right.
you. And so
Yeah.
he's like setting him up to be like, you got to trust in me. Like, don't you know that I have you? So let's start like small, sort of, and give you the chance to grab the snake by the tail. And he does it, and he turns back into the staff. So we see like there's a one test. So that I feel like that was very like for Moses, like that sign. Which again, you said we will see this later. Um, and then the next one is like, hey, like put your hand inside your cloak. All right, pull it out. Like, oh, the skin is leprous. Like again, it's just like, what is this like?
I'd be freaking out.
Yeah. Like, am I
Like
gonna be
what?
stuck with this hand that is like diseased and like
Yeah.
like where do I and I don't know how much time in between, was it a quick like in and out? Could have been like, hey, I'm gonna let Moses like sit in it for a bit. Like, guess what? You have this hand now. Like, um, like freaking out again. But again, he's like, put it back in, pull it out, and it's been restored. And so you get these, I think both these like time like these were kind of not like a little bit like a test for Moses of just like, hey, like, or more of like a reminder, I would say, I think, of just like, hey, I have you. Like, I got you in this. Like, obviously things are gonna be hard. Like, and but you gotta remember that your faith is in me, and like going into these situations, like you said before, like I am the I am. So it's like that's who's sending you. So I have your back. Here are some things I'm gonna equip you with, some of these signs. And then the last one is kind of like I think for if those non-believers where he's kind of like if they're not going to listen to me if they don't believe out of these first two, well, I got a big one for you. And that's turning water into blood here. So we kind of get to this like this big one that we see. So
That is so good, man. Great insight. I love that. Yeah. So verse 10, we'll pick it up. He says, but Moses replied to the Lord. So even after seeing these signs, right?
mhm.
He says, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent. Okay. That's a lie,
Yeah.
right? That's a straight up lie. But we'll get into either in the past or recently or since you have been speaking to your servant. So he's covering all his bases. He's like, I've never been, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish. Verse 11, Yahweh, the Lord, said to him, who placed a mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. Moses said, please, Lord, send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and also he is on his way now to meet you. He will rejoice when he sees you. You will speak with him and tell him what to say. I will help both of you and him to speak, and will teach you both what to do. He will speak to the people for you. He will serve as a mouth for you, and you will serve as God to him. And take the staff in your hand that you will perform the signs with. So let's just kind of talk about that right there. Now, the reason I said that, that's a lie. It's like because we know from Hebrews, it delves a little bit into the fact that Moses was raised in the ways of Egypt. So again, maybe he had a speech impediment, maybe he had something there, okay. But the reality is, in the house of Pharaoh, he would have been taught, he would have had access to all the things and been learned and trained and taught all of this stuff, right? And so it's highly doubtful that he just was not a good speaker. It's highly doubtful that he was not eloquent of speech. It really seems like, based on his response to the Lord already up to this point, that he's just making excuses because he just feels like he's not adequate. And that's really what it comes down. I don't think Moses is saying like he's not willing to do it. I think he feels like he truly is not worthy of doing it. And I want us to really consider that, because I think more times than not, that's what we find ourselves believing about ourselves. I think we know the Lord. Oftentimes we're like, yeah, God can do it, but I just don't think He can use me. I don't feel that, I don't think I'm good enough. Well, no, we're not. That's the point. We're not good. We're not capable of doing all of these incredible things. It's God who does it in and through us. But there's also a side of it that He has created us to do some pretty cool stuff. As human beings, the minds that he's given us, the abilities he's given us to be creative, to think, to reason. There's actually a lot that God has created us to be able to do. Um, like he says, who made the mouth? Who did all this? It's me, right? But on top of that and beyond all that is the fact that he is God and he can do this stuff. So whenever we feel like we're not adequate, we're not capable, um, we need to remember what John the Baptist said, right? That less of me and more of him, less of me and more of him. So in my life, the more that I allow God to work in me, the more of him's going to work through me. And it's less of me getting in the way. And it just allows people to see him in my life. But the fact is, he's choosing to use me and you and all of us to do this, and that's what's amazing about it. That he would choose to use someone like me, like us, to do his work. But that's his design, and it's so cool.
Yeah, I think yeah. I get to the point here where yeah, he's asking him about like we see God just kind of say like, "Hey, I'm the one that like can create like I make humans speak, I make them deaf, I make them mute, I make them blind." Like and I think the reason behind that is just like, hey, like these people are still be able to rejoice in me and we can still have that and what stops me from helping you speak?
Mhm.
And I think you're right where he's just like I just don't want to go in it. And then because then you get to the point 14 where he's like, well, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. And like we're gonna learn more about Aaron, which I think is gonna be fun. So remember that
Mm.
that that he
Yeah.
gives, and we'll find out if he was more of an asset or maybe not much of an asset going
Uh,
forward. But yeah, it's just kind of like, okay, well, if you're not going to listen to me, I love it how it says the Lord's anger burned against Moses. Because how many times do we
mm,
see we think of like an angry God, right? Like, no, I think that's like just something to think about of just in general. Because sometimes we think of this like we think of heaven and it's happy-go-lucky and everything's so happy, and it's like, well, we see the Lord angry in this. How many times do we get to see that? Probably a lot more than you think, actually, but it's one of those where he's mad at Moses. He's like, "Sure, all right, well, if you're not gonna do it, I mean, I'm making you kind of do it,
yeah.
and you're gonna take Aaron with you." And so now it's kind of funny because it's just like Aaron, who probably had no clue what was going on, and just kind of just gets thrown into this mess, like not really a
Mm.
mess, but thrown into this mission with Moses. And so yeah, I think as we'll read on, we'll see how that works out. But going back to what we're talking about of like fighting what God has for us sometimes can just like we know what we should be doing. I mean, we might be angering God on that sense when we fight that. And then if we take too much time on what we're being called to do, I mean, like we might be given something to help push us in the right direction, and it's either going to help us out or it might diminish, like struggle a little bit to get to the finish line when it would have been a lot easier to just follow what God had in our footsteps right from the beginning. That's
Yeah.
kind of foreshadowing because eventually we'll get to all that. But yeah, I think if I were Moses and like we talked about, if he was actually a good speaker, it would have been a lot easier for him to just go out and do what he was doing. But now he's got to work with Aaron. He's got to work with through him. He can't control him. Like he's got to figure out what he wants, and it just adds another layer to the story. I think
Mm.
the fact that Moses waited so long to be like, all right, like I guess I should be doing what you're telling me to do.
Yeah.
So
That's really good.
yeah.
It makes me think of when the Lord, expelled Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, you're still going to eat, you're still going to do these things that I gave you before. It's just going to be more difficult now.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, God is concerned about Levi or Aaron as well. He
Yeah.
loves Aaron as well. He wants to work in his life, and so he, I love that you brought that up. That it says God's anger burned against Moses, and then his response to Moses was like again, getting him to think through things and asking him questions. That's a really great thing for us as parents to remember sometimes. Like sometimes our kids do things and we're like, oh, why don't you just listen to me? But if we just get angry and fly off the handle and just like because I said so, um, And sometimes we do have to be like, hey, I'm the parent. You just got to trust me. But so many times, if we follow our Heavenly Father's example and just get them to think about things, get them to, as he says through the prophet Isaiah, come, let's reason together. God is willing to do that with us. And I love that. It's a great reminder for me. Like, it's okay to take your time with your kids, be patient. This is about teaching them, right? You want to get a project done, you want some help. It's not about the project. It's about taking that time to, help them to grow and understanding and all of that. And that's what God's doing here with Moses and Aaron and everyone involved, really. It's pretty cool.
Even the
So
staff, even the staff gets a role. We'll see. Go. Everyone gets a role.
everyone gets something to do. That's great, Aaron. So yeah, so he goes on, yeah, in verse 18. Then Moses went back to his father-in-law Jethro and said to him, "Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt and see if they are still living." Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." Now in Midian, the Lord, and this is where Jethro was, this is where Moses had been living all these years. Um, so now in Midian, the Lord told Moses, "Return to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and sons, which again, if you've not read this story before, in that 40 years where he was in the wilderness, uh, being a shepherd, he got married and they had a family. So he's got his life. It's like good, right? I got my life. This is a peaceful life. I'm just gonna camp there for just a second because I know so many people, it's like we want to make this world our home. We want to be comfortable. We want to get everything set. And this world is not our home. And I think that's a great reminder to us that God is calling us to greater things. And He has an amazing home that He's preparing for us with Him one day. But it's not here. Anyway, so he says, go back to Egypt. I'm sorry, they're all dead. Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took God's staff in his hand. There's that staff. Verse 21, the Lord instructed Moses, when you go back to Egypt, make sure you do before Pharaoh all the wonders that I have put within your power. But I will harden his heart so that he won't let the people go. And we'll talk quite a bit about that. Verse 22, and you will say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. I told you, let my son go so that he may worship me. But you refused to let him go. Look, I am about to kill your firstborn son. All right, let's talk. There's a couple things in there that I think are pretty big. Let's kind of let's kind of camp there a little bit. um, I just one thing I want to highlight first. Again, well, I think there's two big things here that I've heard conversations. I've heard a lot of questions about over the years. Um, Colton, I'll let you take the one if you want, where it says God will harden Pharaoh's heart, but I will harden his heart. We can talk about that. Um, and then the other one is God calling Israel his firstborn son. So I just want to talk about that real quick because I've heard people say, well, wait, I thought Jesus was his only begotten son. Why would God call Israel his firstborn? That's even been used to say, no, it's Israel, right? There's a lot of conversations in certain circles about, uh, that Jesus wasn't the Messiah, that it's all through Israel because we see things like this in the Old Testament where it's like, oh, no, God's calling Israel his son, not Jesus. And of course, we know that's not true from so many scriptures, but here's one thing to consider. God is making a point to Pharaoh. And there's those two statements. I want us to talk about those because those are those kind of statements when you read in scripture, like him saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that we talk about. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why would God do that? Don't we have free will and this sort of thing? Yep. There's context. And I want us to not gloss over the context and what God is doing and the point he's trying to make. So with this whole thing about him saying Israel is his firstborn son, he called Abraham out of this land of Ur, of the Chaldeans, right? This precursor to Babylon and all this stuff, and then he promises Abram, then Abraham, says, "You're going to have a son." Even though it's not physically possible at this point, you're too old and Sarah's beyond childbearing years. I'm going to promise you, I'm going to give you a son. That's a miracle. And he does. He has a son. He has Isaac. And then Isaac has Jacob, who is later called Israel, um, which there's a lot of discussion about what that name means, like Prince of God, like, this. And I think that's part of this conversation is that God was calling Abraham to be the father of many nations. That's what the name Abraham means, right? Before Abram was just father. That's what Abram meant. And then he says, I'm going to make you a father of many nations. Your name will be Abraham. And we know that to mean all this prophecy, all of this history, all of these things that happened, it's about Jesus, the Messiah, who has come to save mankind. That's how, and he came through that lineage, through Abraham. So Abraham did become the father of many nations, not through Isaac, not through Jacob, not stopping there, but that lineage that goes all the way through the Bible that we see where Jesus was born and has become the savior of mankind. Anyone who will trust in Jesus can be saved, right? And we see that Pharisees and Sadducees arguing a lot with Jesus about their heritage as children of Abraham, right? That happens a lot in the Gospels. And Jesus making statements like, God can raise up children from these stones. That you're leaning on your heritage, your lineage in Abraham. And I love the fact that Jesus makes a statement of when he says, I am, right? I believe it's John chapter 8 where he's talking about he was there, right? He knew Abraham. And they're like, how could you know, you're not that old. And he's saying, I am. Goes right back to these moments of with Moses and Abraham and saying, I'm God. You miss the point. You're putting all your eggs in this basket of physical lineage that you were physically, born from the heritage, the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you're missing the point that it was all about being saved from your sins. That's what Jesus came to do. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. And so when we look at something like this and we go, why is he saying this then? Why is he making a point? Because he's going to be talking directly to Pharaoh about his firstborn son and the fact that he's going to judge Pharaoh's household and all of Egypt and kill the firstborn son if Pharaoh doesn't relent. And we'll talk more about that. But again, God is just trying to help Pharaoh to see from his point of view. And Pharaoh, of course, thought of himself as a god. In Egypt, the pharaohs were thought of as gods on earth. These incarnate divine beings, which they weren't. They were just people. And so God is trying to break through to Pharaoh and show him what he means and why he's caring for his people in the first place, because he's God and Pharaoh's not. Again, that's something we could talk a whole 714 and beyond about, but just to kind of consider a little bit there of why that statement's even made. So I don't know if you'd like to talk about the hardening of heart, or if we want to wait and
Yeah.
kind of get into that, or
Yeah, I mean, I know it comes up later. It is another long one we could probably talk about. I guess I could put it just a little bit. I don't know, it might take a long. Yeah, the hardening heart of
I
the
feel like we
Pharaoh.
got time.
Yeah. Um, I just know that again, another one of those like, wow, is God like doing like where does free will fit into this? And we will see again this come up of this hardening of the heart and like was it God doing it? Was it or where's like a Pharaoh in this? Because the Pharaoh said like it says that he hardened his heart. I will say that in these moments that you read, I think it's really God letting Pharaoh do what he wants. I think and we'll see where Moses will perform signs and be like, and give many signs and many of and these plagues that come, and it's just like, do you not realize that there is a God? And seeing all this, Pharaoh still is against God, and throughout the Bible, we see that there's only one like sin that's like unforgivable, I guess, and that's like that blasphemy against God, where it's what the right answer is, God is real, whatever, and to continue to say I'm not gonna follow God. That's the only true like unforgivable sin. And when we see that comes up, we see in the New Testament when it talks about Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And so that's where the Pharaoh's at, I believe, where it's just like this, hey, I see these signs, I see these plagues, but I refuse to listen. I refuse to believe in this God. I refuse, and I don't know if it's because he has a big head about who he is. I think that's probably part of it. The fact that his like brother kind of returns and like it was like, hey, after being gone for so long and being like, hey, wait, what are you talking about? I just think that the hardening of his heart is based off Pharaoh's own resistance to God, and that's really where it is. And God allows it to happen. He allows that that hardening to happen with Pharaoh, and it just becomes a really big mess for him and his people, and even for Moses and his people. So I think we can definitely talk more as it comes back around, but just to kind of
Yeah.
set that up, I think that's a great place to just start. So
I agree, and I think that's a really legitimate question for people, and we should, again, God is a God who wants to talk, who wants to help us reason through these things. And I heard it put a really great way. It's when God says, "I will harden his heart." It's like a file, right? When we take a file to something, we're trying to work that and shape that, whether it's woodworking, you're filing down, or metal or whatever. And that file is, it's causing a reaction, it's doing something to that material. um, and so if the material's good, it's going to receive that filing, it's going to shape, it's going to do really nice. But if it's metal that's maybe super brittle, it's just going to break. And I think that's what we see here. Like what you said it perfectly, it's like he's letting Pharaoh make the choice, and Pharaoh's response to God is who he is. You're not going to change God.
hmm
We have to make that choice of whether we're going to follow God or we're just going to resist. And if we resist, it's not going to go well for us. So,
hmm
but yeah, there's so much to it that as we go through the story later on, we're going to see that actually we're going to be able to understand that even better, I think.
yeah,
So I know we're running real close on time here, so we can finish this chapter up. I just read through it, and then so on the trip, verse 24, it says, on the trip at an overnight campsite, it happened that the Lord confronted him, Moses, and intended to put him to death. So Zipporah, this is Moses' wife, took a flint, cut off her son's foreskin, threw it at Moses' feet, and said, "You are a bridegroom of blood to me." So he let him alone. At that time, she said, "You are a bridegroom of blood," referring to the circumcision. Now, if you have not read this story before or heard, you're like, what is going on? Like,
yeah,
this just seemed to come out of nowhere.
yeah,
um, and I think we can probably try to hit just a little bit of it right now, and maybe we can have more time next week. But so again, going back to Abraham, because this is several hundred years, this is a few generations later, after Abraham, where the Israelites were in Egypt for 400 years. And at that time, it had been Joseph, one of Jacob or Israel's sons, who had come to power in Egypt, right? So there's a lot of history here, but the act of circumcision was given to Abraham when God told Abraham to circumcise himself, as a sign of this covenant that he was making. And so again, that sign of circumcision, that sign of the covenant, represented a lot, including just that cutting away of the flesh. The when we see it now, and Colossians well, really, the first three chapters of Colossians kind of hits on this. But in the book of Colossians, Paul talks about the circumcision of our hearts, done not with human hands, but by the hands of Christ. In other words, this is a picture of cutting away the sinful nature of ourselves, right? And there's a whole lot we could get into. We just don't have time for that. But so Moses knew this. Even though he was raised in the house of Pharaoh, he was still a Hebrew. And he was aware of it. And that's the thing that lets us know, because he was going out to see the Hebrews, to see his people, he was aware of things like this. And this was like the big one. Circumcision was like the big thing in that culture, in the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So if he didn't know anything else, he would have at least known about this, right? And again, it's something that God gave to Abraham as a sign of the covenant that he was making, that they were supposed to bring light and truth to the nations around them, that they were supposed to, carry on this lineage. And it was no small thing. So if you're like, why is God making such a big deal about this? Why was he going to kill Moses and all this? Well, it's because Moses knew this was a big deal, and because Moses was going into Egypt full of uncircumcised Egyptians. And we know that him doing this, again, this is before Christ, right? So there's some things there that when God had given them, they were to obey those commands. They were to obey those things, because he was saying, this is a sign for the nations around you. And you come in there uncircumcised. What's that saying? I think that's a big part of it. And again, Moses kind of pushing back against God. Uh, God's like, look, Moses, I'm patient, but you need to stop this pushback. You know what to do. I'm calling you to do this. And you're going into, in fact, Colton, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. They're going in, this is warfare, right? This is major spiritual warfare. That as we get into the other, when we start talking about the plagues, we're going to see some really amazing stuff that God is doing through those. I think maybe a lot of you may be surprised when we start talking about some of the stuff in there. You're like, maybe you've never known this.
Yeah.
But God is like, there's spiritual warfare going on. And he's telling Moses, if you don't follow my commands, you will be chewed up and spat out by the gods of Egypt, by Pharaoh, by the magicians, by these people. You need to be um, trusting me and doing what I'm telling you. So I think for us today, we think about spiritual warfare, and it's love to hear your thoughts. It's not about following these commands, but what Jesus has said, and again, just how we can submit to God. Peter and Paul, they both talk about humbling ourselves before the Lord, and all of these things. Like, it's a big deal in us trusting God, and and recognizing that there's a battle going on all around us that we don't even see.
Yeah, I think when it comes to spiritual warfare, I mean, this is just like a moment of just like I'm giving all myself to you. Like,
Mhm.
that's where we're at, right? It's like we're taking. I mean, God's bigger than ourselves. So, and to ourselves, it's like, what and where am I at in my life? That is there some area in my life that I'm like, this is what goes against like the like what God has for me in life. And so like one of the things at the time here was just like God just like believe kind of just like, dude, like I need you to you're following me. I need you to follow me like 100% in. So this is part of it. Like, and
Mhm.
I like backstory kind of behind that is just like Zivra was like not Israeli. It was not Jew. Like she wasn't part of that group. So it's like I think that's why she's and I don't know if she's mad or whatever. Kind of seems like she's mad. 'Cause she throws a foreskin at Moses' feet. Uh, but yeah, it's just kind of just like this last like I need you to be elevate like I need you to be in with me. Same with the snake, same with the hand. Showed you these signs. You are going to war, like again, like warfare that you're going into, and there can't be any like blips here. Like there can't be anything we're missing. And so it's just getting. I think like God just wants Moses to get right with him, and I think we'll see at the end here. It's like he then like they'll gather up all the elders of the Israelites. Like he's getting everyone together. So he's like, I need you're my commander. You get right with me, and so we can get right with everyone else. Which is I think just in our own lives, like within our own households, within our own families, within our own world. It's like we like to better shepherd those around us. Like if we start seeing struggles and stuff, sometimes we just need to get ourselves in that situation where we feel as though we were better surrounded and better right with God. That's just like, hey, it's like there's nothing, and we brought this up, like saying good things about people, not like basics of just like not cussing or doing anything like that, where it's just like no one can bring those things against you if you don't do those things. And
Mm.
so it doesn't diminish where you're at, like because we are we're in a warfare for God, we're in a spiritual warfare. Like people are looking to tear us down. The devil's looking to tear us down. And if they have nothing bad to say about us, they have no ammo. There's nothing they can do against us. And I think
Yeah,
this is the same kind of like concept here, where it's like there's nothing they can use against you, Moses, if you are if fully following the way. And I think that's what this is setting up here. So,
that's so good. Yeah, the fact that God cares and loves us and cares about us so much, to work with us through all this. He's having a lot of patience with Moses, and because he loves Moses, he loves Zipporah, he loves his people, he loves Pharaoh. He's really wanting Pharaoh, but because he's the God outside of time, he knows what Pharaoh's going to choose. But his desire, his heart, is that all would be saved, and we just see him. And I love, as we um, this chapter, the end of this chapter, I love how it's like the people, they're like, God paid attention. He heard us. He's going to rescue us. I'm like, oh, that's so awesome. Because I know I felt that way. Like God sees me. There's been times in my life where I felt just down and out or beat down or on the outskirts or whatever in life. And God has reminded me that he's right there, that he's working, that he's paying attention. And he's paying attention to Moses. He's not letting these little things slide. He's like, Moses, I'm
mhm,
working with you. I got to work with you here. You got to trust me here. Let's do this. Because he sees all that we go through, all that we feel, all that we think about. And so I guess that's our encouragement to you all today as we close out this morning is just be encouraged. Let it be refreshing to you that God sees you. He knows you so personally, knows you better than you know yourself. And his desire is good things for you, good things for us, a hope and a plan for our future. And in that, it takes us trusting him. For that to come to fruition, for that to come forth, it takes us trusting him. He's got all this stuff in store for us, but are we going to trust him one step at a time? Right? I think that's what it really comes down to.
mhm,
So we are excited to really go through this over the next few weeks on these Fridays, Colton and I,
mhm.
here in Exodus, and yeah, just hoping that you're going to join us. And there's some pretty cool stuff coming that, again, maybe
Yeah.
some of you have never heard before. Might blow your mind a little bit on some of these with the plagues and stuff. We're excited to get into. But so, Colton, would you mind praying us out today?
Yeah, I can pray us out today. It'd be awesome. All right. Uh, dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for giving us the ability to meet on a Friday like this, and just go jump into your word. I pray that you're with us during this time as we just go through and fellowship and discern what you are trying to teach us each and every morning, each and every day. I pray for encouragement, that we know that you are looking into our lives, and just trying to shape us. And I pray that we can be encouraged to walk upright throughout the day, so that no one can use anything against us. That it's that our love that we have for you in that allows us to glorify you, God. And I pray that we can have the ability to listen, um, like Moses here, that we can hopefully listen and do exactly what you have planned for us. Hopefully the first time. But if not, I just give thanks you're patient with us, and that we can eventually get to where you want us to be. Amen.
Amen. All right, everyone, have an amazing day. We want to see you so badly this weekend at one of our campuses or online. And join the guys back here Monday for the 714. We'll see ya.